Good morning. Hope you're after a great Thursday so far. We're going to do something wild today. We are going to accelerate right into the middle of the story you are least likely to click on this morning because very few people wake up and say, I can't wait to read another article on inflation. Very few people. It's much easier to click on the story of the engagement between Machine Gun Kelly and Megan Fox than to click on an article on inflation. However, and guilty as charged, by the way, however, inflation perhaps is one of the biggest stories of the week and potentially one of the biggest stories of 2022. So just give me a couple minutes to provide a good foundation because this is a headline you're going to see a lot about, not just in the month of January, but likely throughout the next year. So what is inflation? Inflation is the rising price of goods and a decrease in your purchasing power. So when you see a headline that says there's high inflation, you think to yourself, well, that means prices are going up and my dollar is buying me less. And we don't want that. We don't want your dollar to buy you less. We want your dollar to buy you just the right amount for the time that we're in. Inflation happens on a regular basis in a healthy, evolving economy. We expect some inflation, right? We expect to pay more for a certain item than our parents paid in the past. But economists typically like to see a pace of inflation of about 2%. So the news this week is that the pace of inflation for last year, for 2021, was 7%. And that's a really big deal. I want you to know that. So it's not just that inflation is higher. It's that it's more than triple what economists would typically like to see. So why does that matter? Let's think about inflation very literally, right? Like inflating a helium balloon, and the balloon is the economy. We want some inflation to that balloon. We want some inflation because we want that balloon to bounce around and float around our house and entertain our kids for several hours. We want that. We don't want to overinflate the balloon because what happens, the balloon bursts. So when we're seeing that constant price increases and wages trying to keep up and all of that sort of inflationary environment, that can have the opposite effect. It could actually slow down the economy, damage the economy. We don't want to see that for our own families, but also for the global economy because America is the largest economy in the entire world. And what happens here affects everybody. Similarly, though, we don't want no inflation at all or a deflationary environment because what happens? The balloon then doesn't float at all. So it really is that Goldilocks effect. So we don't have to be scared of inflation, but too much inflation is a concern. And that's why you have high-ranking officials, some of the top economists in the United States, saying that they're concerned about this environment that we're in. So why are we in it? Why is inflation happening? There can be many factors to inflation. And one of the things I've learned is that even those at the highest level, right, with the best degrees and the most wonderful pedigrees when it comes to the economy, have a lot of disagreement about why inflation happens and how to fix it. You know, how to actually impact inflation. There's always a lot of disagreement about that. So there are several factors that are coming up for the inflationary environment that we're in right now, some having to do with the pandemic. For example, you can see price increases when you have short supply of something and high demand. So short supply of toilet paper, high demand, prices for toilet paper goes way up. And, you know, when prices increase and they increase rapidly, oftentimes they sort of hang out there. They don't come down right away. And so we've seen that impact now going on nearly 2 years for a lot of different items. So that's one of the reasons that you could see at least one of the ingredients for inflation. But there are those other ingredients that have very little to do with our immediate time, and that has to do with stimulus. So stimulus that's happened around the pandemic, the government pushing in money into the economy and in a way that some lawmakers and some economists believe will support the economy during a difficult time. But we remember we had, you know, economic recessions where we have pushed stimulus into the economy before, and that all adds up. And so going back to that balloon metaphor, there are some that believe if you overstimulate the economy, that's also pushing more helium into an already inflated balloon. You don't want to push too much because you don't want a negative effect. And that's why some are asking the question when it looks to trying to figure out how to pull some of this inflation back is to change some of the economic policies that we've seen. Some of these quote unquote easy money stimulus programs that we've seen where the government has really allowed people to access money very easily, very low borrowing rates, for example, to try to keep the economy moving through tumultuous time periods. So you might hear some talk about how the Federal Reserve, the central bank, is pulling back some of its programs that were existing during the pandemic and even before to try to support the economy because they're concerned that, wait a minute, maybe the economy is overinflated. So how does this impact your life? Well, we already know that it means that our purchasing power is going down. We don't like that. And you probably have noticed an increased price of goods, and maybe what you bought in the past, your money just doesn't go as far. That's the immediate impact. But when you look at some of these programs potentially changing, borrowing rates are something that could immediately impact you. So whether it's your home equity line of credit, your credit card, auto loans, all of that could be impacted by the price of borrowing going up slightly as a way to sort of slow down or tamp down on some of this inflation. It's just one way. Interesting though, I just wanted to get your perspective on this. There are some that believe that one of the reasons we're in an inflationary period like we're in is because so many of us have bought goods over the last 2 years, bought items like outdoor furniture for our homes instead of spending money on services, going on vacation, going out to restaurants. And that has led to the increased price of products as well. And again, anything that's kind of fueling that increase, it's much more difficult for that increase to come back. And so one economist was raising this question about whether or not our change of behavior could also help this inflationary period come off of that really high pace. Just one way that maybe some of your decisions are having an immediate impact on the environment and the economy that we're in. Have you noticed that you've been doing that? Spending more money on goods than actually experiences? I'm curious your thoughts on that. I feel like that's something that I could definitely relate to. And these are all little pieces to the puzzle of the inflation picture in America. So hope this is helpful to you. I think this is a really important story, one to definitely watch, and we'll be keeping an eye on it for you. So you don't have to wake up in the morning and click on the article on inflation. You can click away at all the other stuff, and we'll just take a couple minutes. Make sure you're prepared. Quick story before the weekend, just want to mention to you because it really shows also the impact of regionalism in our press. So you may be seeing more headlines over the next several days that the Omicron variant or outbreak has peaked in America, that we're seeing signs that we're off of that peak period of infection. Just know that a lot of those headlines are really focused on the Northeast, where you saw that spike of infection and where, by the way, most news organizations are based. So there's sort of that talk of like, we could be through the peak, but that's not the way that all epidemiologists and doctors are looking at it, because depending on where you are in the country, the level of infection from the Omicron variant could vary. And so maybe it's peaking in certain parts of the United States and yet to peak in other places. But the good news is that we're even hearing some of the research or data seems to be suggesting that. And, that's what we want to come off a peak of an outbreak. So something to watch and something I'm going to be keeping an eye on as we go into next week. So a lot of stories. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, visit our website, smarternews.com. We have a great weekend newsletter and actually a really exciting interview to share with you. So if you haven't signed up, do so, and more on all of these items on smarternews.com. Have a great day.